Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Lisa Zawacki, and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager here at Surefire Social. Today I'm joined by team members Michelle and Sashi, and we're extremely excited to introduce you all to Mark Montini. Mark is Surefire's new Executive Vice President of Brand Strategy and Chief Customer Officer here. If you're joining us for your first Surefire Social webinar, please know that education is always a top priority for our team. Our goal is to help businesses with local customers navigate the digital marketing world through coaching. With this in mind, we've always aimed to act as a partner in digital marketing, working hand in hand with our customers to ensure your success. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the question box in your webinar control panel. The team and I will be here behind the scenes to answer or pass them on to Mark. If you want to go ahead and test that out right now, add a comment and tell us where you're joining us from today. And just one last housekeeping note, just in time for the holidays, we will be offering Google Chromecast for any attendee who schedules a digital marketing consultation with Surefire today. But we'll have a little more on that at the end of the webinar. For now, I'll pass it on to Mark. Mark, thanks again for your time today. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa, and I appreciate the time that everyone on the call has given us for this webinar. I'd like to start today with what many of you on the webinar may consider to be somewhat disappointing news, because I know that many people come to webinars like this or read blog posts or look at other educational materials in the hopes of getting a cut and dry checklist of the 3 or 4 or 5 things they can do immediately. And while those are definitely valuable, I've oftentimes found that there's even more value when you present information in a general way that focuses on how to think about a problem strategically, because it allows the people who get the information, whether it be through webinar, blog posts, or in other channels, it allows them to apply those specific principles to their businesses as a whole. So what you will see as we go through the webinar, and as my background that I'll walk you through here in just a minute will illustrate, I tend to be a bit of a high-level thinker. I like to look at things from 40,000 feet as opposed to at the detailed level on the ground. And really what my focus is to say, how do we translate that big picture into some strategic aha moments that I can generate on this webinar that you can take back and apply to your business or to your marketing challenges, regardless of the situation you're in, whether you're a large company, a small company, young, old, in the home services industry, or a different industry, you'll be able to take these principles and apply them to your business and your challenges all the same. So with that, let me take just a few seconds to introduce myself so you have an idea of what my perspective is and really what my background is. Of course, just like all of you, I was raised by a family of entrepreneurs, primarily in the agricultural industry. Got married and have 3 wonderful kids with my wife, and just currently live outside of Atlanta, Georgia. From a business perspective, I spent most of my career as an entrepreneur, really focused on figuring out how to take advantage of problems that other people have by creating solutions that will help them solve those problems and move their businesses forward. Because of that, I tend to have built a reputation a bit as a disruptor, meaning that I tend to be wired in a way that allows me to look at problems in a different way than many people do, and to come up with solutions that tend to be outside the box. And I hope that as we go through the webinar today, you'll begin to see some of that disruptive nature come out in some of the problems and mistakes that I'm going to identify. Most of my career has been spent as a marketer. I've had the wonderful opportunity to work in marketing everywhere from Madison Avenue agencies on $100 million projects all the way down to Main Street, where we work on $100 projects. But for the most part of my career, I have been entirely small business focused. This year represented a bit of a milestone for me personally. This year, if you added up the revenues, the marketing that I've worked on with my clients over my career has generated, it hit the $1 billion mark. And so I was very excited about that, simply because when you think about $1 billion in the perspective of your typical small business, it means that over the years, I've had the fortune of working with a large number of small businesses and find personally satisfying the fact that we've been able to impact their businesses in a very positive way in terms of revenue generation. So it's that career path and that personal path that's led me here today. on the phone talking to all of you about the 7 mistakes, the 7 most common mistakes that I see when I work with small business owners when it comes to local digital marketing. So we'll jump right in, and I will give you a quick caveat that after each of these mistakes, I'll take a few minutes to answer any questions that folks may have. You can submit your questions via the chat online, and they'll be asked by either Lisa or Michelle or someone else on our team when I take those breaks. So feel free to post those questions. You can expect a short break between every one of these most common mistakes that I'm going to go through, and we can speak directly to how those mistakes might apply to your business or give you more advice on how to avoid and or overcome them. So jumping in, let's talk about mistake number 1. The first and perhaps largest mistake that I see when I work with small business owners when it comes to their local digital marketing is that they simply overcomplicate the process. And when I say overcomplicate the process, I can talk specifically about digital marketing, but I can also talk about marketing as a whole. I often joke, even though there's a lot of truth to it, that I am a marketer, which means the simpler, the better. The easier that I can make things to understand for consumers, the more likely they are to respond. It also means that, generally speaking, I have a very simplistic mind. And so if marketing was a complex undertaking, I would be a complete failure at it and wouldn't be delivering this webinar today. The fact of the matter is that there are many more elements to marketing today than there were 20 and 30 and 40 years ago. But at the end of the day, marketing is still the same fundamental process it has always been and will always be. Because if we boil marketing down to the most simplistic definition possible, it's nothing more than the journey that you take a potential customer on that takes them from wherever they are today, which you see in the upper left-hand corner of my screen, down a path to get them where you want them to be, which is exchanging their dollars for your goods and or your services. That fundamentally is all marketing is. In a world of social media, in a world of search marketing, in a world of websites, in a world of technology, in a world of big data, we have really, I think, done ourselves a disservice, especially at the small business level, by overcomplicating marketing and forgetting about the fundamental primary objective that we're trying to achieve, and that is to take one customer, one potential customer, from wherever they are today to where we want them to be, which is exchanging their dollars for our goods and services. Whether we use a single billboard, or whether we use a search ad, or whether we use a website or a social media site, or any combination of those is literally irrelevant when you think about the fundamentals of marketing. And so one of the mistakes that happens is a lot of small business owners become overwhelmed with the challenge of how do I not only understand, but how do I manage all of the complexity that they believe marketing has in it today. And there's no doubt that at the end of the day, it's a bit more difficult to manage marketing and to fully understand marketing, and I'm going to talk about that in other mistakes. But I really wanted to start by spotlighting the fact that when you look at marketing, regardless of it's digital marketing or traditional marketing, fundamentally it's exactly the same way it was when our options were billboards and leaflets and radio ads as it is today when we have thousands and thousands of options to choose from on how to market our business. And it's important that we always and consistently take a step back to make sure that we understand the end goal is to identify that singular person out there that we want to become a customer and start that journey where we take them from wherever they are today, wherever their mind is, whatever their buying pattern is, and walk them down a path on that journey to the point where they exchange their dollars for our goods and services. And if we can't figure out definitively how what we're doing with our marketing dollars is contributing to that journey, then the odds are very, very high that those are wasted marketing dollars. So that is mistake number 1, and my assumption is we probably won't have a ton of questions because it's fairly obvious and simple, but I thought a very good starting point as we dig into some of these other mistakes. So Lisa or Michelle, do we have any questions so far, or should we just jump on to mistake number 2?
I have one question here, Mark. Is it a mistake to abandon local advertising?
That is a very, very good question, and I am going to actually punt on that one probably until either mistake number 2 or mistake number 3, simply because I'm going to talk about that and the importance of it really in all the mistakes that I'm talking about. But I'll speak directly to that in mistake number 2 or mistake number 3, so I'll punt on that one just not to get distracted.
All right, great, carry on.
All right. Well, let's talk about mistake number 2. So we talk about mistake number 1 being that they overcomplicate the process. Mistake number 2 is that they spend their marketing dollars too narrowly, meaning that instead of focusing on several different opportunities to walk people down that path, they only focus on a handful. And typically that's driven by the handful of opportunities that they either feel like they completely understand, or the handful of opportunities that they have the most confidence are actually delivering results. The reason that this becomes a challenge and is a mistake is that the journey that consumers take in today's world has changed dramatically over the last 10 years, and it will continue to change in the coming years. So when we look at that journey that I just talked about, it's very reasonable, and you should expect the fact that as consumers go down that path and as you take them on that journey, they're going to interact with your brand on multiple different channels. So they may first learn about you because of a search engine marketing campaign that you're running. But then they may learn more about you through social media, in this example, Facebook. From there, they may visit your website or a landing page where they collect more information and perhaps provide you with their email address to get even more information. Obviously, they're going to go and look at a review site to see what other customers have thought of you. Maybe if you're running search remarketing, you're going to stalk them over the internet as they go to look at holiday shopping or what the football scores are. Your ads are going to be appearing to them. Maybe they're on your email list, so they're receiving monthly or weekly emails. Perhaps you send them a mail piece, and then ultimately they decide they're ready to buy, and they go to Google My Business to figure out when you're open and where they can find you. That's the typical journey that a consumer takes today. And so if you begin to narrow your marketing dollars, your marketing focus down to the handful of tactics that you feel like you fully understand, or the tactics that you feel confident in are the ones that are delivering the most ROI, you risk missing these consumers as they go down this path, as they take this journey. Because let's just say, for example, that you decided search remarketing and email marketing weren't two things that you understood or that you thought were valuable. You could very easily have walked this customer through search engine marketing, through Facebook advertising, through your website, and your great reputation on review sites. You could have walked them halfway down the buying path. But because you didn't have search remarketing and a competitor did, or because you didn't have email marketing and a competitor did, you put that sale at risk because they didn't finish the journey and you were missing two key channels with which you could communicate to those customers. And if your competitors are there, what happens potentially is that you create the demand for your product, but they ultimately end up buying with your competitor because you weren't there for the entire journey. Now, if you look at all of the data, and if you look at all of the statistics that are out there about today's consumer journey, there's really three things that need to be pushed to the forefront. Today's consumer journey, as you can see on this slide, is a multi-touch journey, meaning they are going to interact with your brand. Your brand will touch them multiple times before they buy on multiple different channels. It will be search engine marketing. It will be social media marketing. It will be website marketing. It will be review site marketing. And most likely, it will be on multiple devices. They'll interact with your brand on a desktop computer. They'll interact with your brand on a mobile device, or they'll interact with your brand on a tablet. So it's very, very easy for small businesses to have that protective mentality where they say, I'm not quite 100% sure I can document whether or not this is working, or I don't fully understand a particular area of marketing, therefore I'm not going to invest my dollars, and they focus their marketing resources too narrowly and they miss key points on this customer journey that they can use to convert customers, or they open the door for those customers to go to their competitors. Your best performing tactic is always getting help. So if you would decide in this scenario that email marketing, let's say, is your best performing tactic, what you would see if you really looked at that consumer journey is that the best performing tactic is getting help from search engine marketing. It's getting help from social media marketing. It's getting help from your website marketing and your online reputation and all of these other things. And so if you focus only on email marketing, what you'll in essence be doing is diluting the overall results of your marketing spend, because you will be eliminating your opportunity to walk with that customer during that entire journey from wherever they are today to where you want them to be. This has really become a big focus for Google. Some of you may follow some of the information that Google puts out, and Google has recently labeled this the moments that matter. And what they communicate is that based on their data, that there are a handful of moments that truly matter in this customer journey. And success in online marketing is to make sure that you as a business owner, you as a local marketer, you own those moments that matter. And focusing your spend, focusing your local digital marketing too narrowly eliminates your ability to own all of the key moments that matter. And so that is mistake number 2, is to make sure that you don't focus so narrowly you're leaving out some of the key moments that matter that are on the consumer's journey from wherever they are today to the point where they're exchanging their dollars for your goods and services. Lisa, any questions about mistake number 2?
No, not at this time.
All right, well, let's move on to mistake number 3, which a lot of people are going to roll their eyes and say, oh my goodness, what is this? Because it is completely contradictory. Because mistake number 3 is that they spend their dollars too broadly. So mistake number 2, of course, is that you spend your dollars too narrowly. Mistake number 3 is that you spend your dollars too broadly. And the reason that small business owners spend their dollars too broadly is simply because of the evolution that's happened over the last 10 years and is continuing to happen and continuing to accelerate currently and will continue to happen in the future. And that is that there are literally thousands of options available for local marketers. So if you look at this chart, this is a chart that's put together every year or so that pretty much is a summary of the leading marketing service providers in a variety of different areas. So if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see it's the logos of companies who offer email marketing solutions, mobile marketing solutions, search and social ads, display advertising, video ads, and so on and so forth. Then you also have the tools on how to manage and execute all of that, how to measure it, and all of these different options. Depending on which study you look at, there are anywhere between 4,500 and about 6,000 different options that you as a small business owner, that you as a local marketer can choose from in today's world. And because marketers tend to be somewhat innovative people who really are focused on what's the next thing, how do we be creative, as opposed to operational folks that say, how do we perfect something that is already exists and is already running, we have a tendency to get a bit distracted about that next shiny object that comes about. And so when we see charts like this, it's very easy for us to say, wow, there are a lot of effective tactics on this chart. When you think about how do you build your marketing program for 2017, your challenge isn't going to be to find places to spend the money. The challenge is going to be narrowing your focus down to the handful of places that will have the greatest impact on your business. And this particular chart and all the options that are out there are designed really to illustrate the fact that it can become overwhelming, and it's very easy to dilute your effectiveness as a marketer by spending little bits of dollars in a variety of different places, as opposed to focusing more dollars on those handful of things that we talked about earlier that are the moments that truly matter for your business. So what happens for a lot of business owners, and the mistake that they make, is they look at a chart like this, and one of two things happen. Either they have paralysis by analysis, where they look at this and they say, I have no idea which one of these is best, therefore I'll do nothing, or I'll do the minimal amount, which we all know doesn't work. Or they look at all of this and they view it as an opportunity, and they begin to make the perfect the enemy of the good, which means they try to do as much of this as they possibly can, which means they end up doing nothing very well and dilute their marketing results. When you think about your marketing budget and you want to overcome this mistake, I'm a big advocate of having a very defined set of how you allocate your marketing dollars. And I like to allocate them into 3 buckets. So the first bucket, which in my world always should be the largest bucket by far, is what I call the predictable bucket. So in my mind, I always want to spend 60 to 70% of my available marketing spend on very predictable tactics. Those are the tactics that allow you to have stability, that allow you to have predictability in your business. So you know that if I spend $1 on this particular tactic, it's going to generate approximately Y in revenue or Y in lead gen or whatever the metric is that you're using to measure its effectiveness. And I like to put the majority of my marketing spend in that bucket. Most of the things that I would spend those dollars on are narrowed down to only a handful of things in those moments that matter. From there, my second bucket is what I call probable, or the tactics that I want to use to prove out. I look at them and I say, I think this is going to work. I have reason to believe that this would work in my market, but I can't get predictable because I'm not quite sure what the results are going to be. I like to spend anywhere between 20 to 30% of my marketing budget on tactics that are in that category. So as I layer on my budget and my marketing plan, I've got 60 to 70% in very predictable tactics. I have 20 to 30% in what I call probable tactics, which means I have reason to believe they'll be successful, but I don't actually know if they're predictable. And then I spend the rest of my budget, which is typically between 5 and 10%, on speculative tactics. And that's when you can dig into a list like this and say, that's a good idea. Let me give that a try. I don't have any expectation that it'll work. For all I know, I may be throwing this money out the window and not see a return. But if I do see a return, it's going to be a significant return and very quickly could become something that I put into my predictable bucket. So when you think about mistake number 3 and focusing your resources too broadly, the guardrails that you can put around yourself to try to make sure that you don't make this mistake is to allocate your marketing dollars not according to channels like social media or email marketing or web marketing, but also allocate them in a way that says, I want the majority going to very predictable tactics. I want a pretty good chunk going to probable but not yet predictable tactics. And I want to reserve a small chunk for the more speculative marketing and hold yourself consistently to that formula, which makes sure that you haven't spread your dollars too broadly. And as we talked about earlier, you also have not spread them too narrowly. So Lisa, that is mistake number 3. Let me see if we have any questions on that before we jump into mistake number 4.
Yes, Mark, we have a question here from Carrie. So with how overwhelming that chart is, how should we evaluate a company's ability to reach our clients during moments that really matter?
That's very, very good, and I like the question. I'm going to sound like a broken record in how I answer all the questions, which is let me push that a little bit. Because really what that question is about attribution. And that tends to be the focus of actually my next mistake, is that the challenge in a world where customers go on a multi-touch, multi-device journey on their way from being a prospect to a customer is that we struggle to find the proper way to attribute success to an individual tactic. And I think that's at the core of the question that Carrie asked, and it's actually at the heart of mistake number 4. So mistake number 4 that I see is that many small business owners, many local digital marketers try to assume absolute attribution, meaning they think back to a world of perhaps the direct mail era where I knew that if I sent you a letter and you responded to that letter. Or if I put up a radio ad and you called in, I knew you were calling because of that radio ad. That is reflective, the absolute attribution model is reflective of old consumer behavior. What we're focused on when we look at this modern day customer journey is that there is no such thing as absolute attribution. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, maybe they went to Google My Business to get the phone number they were going to call to be able to make the purchase. But Google My Business was simply the last click on their journey. Their first click may have been search engine marketing. And so for most businesses, they think of last click or last touch as the key to absolute attribution, when in reality, the consumer journey doesn't allow for absolute attribution, because each of these moments that matter are ultimately driving that customer behavior. And it's very, very easy. And I know for those on the phone or on the webinar that are responsible for marketing plans and have leaders above them who hold them accountable to that, this is a major obstacle in building your marketing plan in a way that's reflective of the modern consumer. Because I've been in these conversations where the people who are up the leadership chain, they don't buy into the I can't have absolute attribution, because that's what they want. Their mind says, I want a one-to-one relation. If I give you $1 to spend on search engine marketing, how's that going to drive revenue? How many leads will it generate? When in reality, marketing today has become a blend. And so what that means, and this gets to the answer to Carrie's question, is that when we think about marketing metrics, it's very, very important that instead of making the mistake of focusing on absolute attribution, we instead focus our attention on what I would call more blended metrics. And let me give you an example of what that looks like. The 3 best metrics that I would recommend you use when we talk in terms of blended metrics are the 3 you see on the screen. The first is the cost to acquire a customer. The second is the lifetime value of the customer. And third is the time to payback. So when we look at the cost to acquire a customer, what we're able to do is we're able to say, look, let's take all of our marketing spend, regardless of whether it was social media or it was search or it was remarketing or it was email. Let's take all of that marketing spend and just assume that all of it, in one way or another, contributed to walking that person down that path to the point where they became a customer. And then let's just simply divide that by the number of customers we were able to generate. And that, of course, is the simple way to be able to get cost to acquire a customer. That becomes our investment. Now, if there's an issue and we need to try to make that number better, then we can dig in tactic by tactic and try to look at the more, what I like to call, vanity metrics of click-through rate and cost per click and cost per lead and things along those lines that are tactic specific. But as long as that cost to acquire a customer makes economic sense for our business, the blended metric like that one is all we really need to know. We just need to push on the gas. Now, in addition to cost to acquire a customer, we want to know the lifetime value of a customer. Because if I know the investment I've made and the value of the customer that came out of that investment, I can very easily calculate whether or not my marketing has an ROI. So if it costs me $100 to acquire a customer and that customer over their lifetime is worth $400, then I have a 3-to-1 ROI or 300% ROI, meaning for every dollar that I invest in marketing, I'm going to net $3 coming back out. And that becomes the ROI. Again, when you look at that metric and you run that up the food chain to leaders in organizations, that speaks to them much more effectively than saying my cost per click is X, my conversion rate is Y. Those are metrics that are important for problem solving and for incremental improvement. But in terms of figuring out whether or not your marketing is effective, focusing on those metrics, and I'm going to give you an illustration of this in mistake number 5, focusing on those more vanity metrics can actually lead you astray. Whereas these blended metrics, like the ones you see on the screen, they give you the truest measure in a modern world of marketing as to whether or not your marketing is working. The challenge that many people face is that this means they kind of have to do some updates to their technology, because most people can be pretty good at determining the cost to acquire a customer, but when you ask them what the lifetime value of that customer is, it becomes much more difficult, because they have to factor in, how do I go and get that information out of my POS system or out of my CRM system or my accounting system, and finding solutions or developing processes that will integrate your transactional revenue collection system, your customer management system, with your marketing systems and bringing those two together to create that simple metric of overall, is my marketing working, is a key to avoiding this mistake. And then, of course, the third metric, time to payback, is vitally important for local business owners, because if I have, as my earlier example, a $100 cost to acquire a customer, a $400 lifetime value of a customer, while that may look good on paper, and it certainly is, it may not be good for a business if it takes me 3 years to get that $400 out of the customer. So when we look at time to payback, what that allows us to factor in is how long does it take me to recover my investment, and that's all about cash flow. So anyone who spent any time looking at small businesses knows that there are a large number of profitable small businesses that fail simply because their cash flow doesn't allow them to grow or to operate according to what their revenue model is. And so in addition to the cost to acquire a customer, lifetime value of a customer, it's important to calculate how long does it take me to recover my initial investment, because that impacts cash flow. And that's what leaders of organizations have to focus on to keep the lights on, keep the payroll flowing day in and day out. So Lisa, I think that kind of answered Carrie's question and also brought in mistake number 4, which is that we no longer live in a world of absolute attribution. So if you build your marketing around absolute attribution, you're looking at flawed data. And when you look at flawed data, you're going to make flawed decisions with your marketing dollars. I was at a Google conference a couple, weeks ago, maybe about a month ago now, and one of the keynote speakers at the conference had a very good quote that I think hits the nail on the head. He said, "It is impossible to properly measure today's customer behavior with yesterday's marketing metrics." And so when we look at mistake number 4, to assume absolute attribution, that's in essence what he was saying, is that if we look at yesterday's marketing metrics, cost per click, click-through rate, impression share, if we look at those metrics to measure the success of marketing, we can't get a proper idea of the current customer journey. Now, we look at those metrics to solve problems, but we don't look at them to be able to say whether or not our marketing is effective or ineffective. So, Lisa, are there any questions about mistake number 4? And hopefully that answered Carrie's question.
Well, you might have covered it since this question popped up, but Jill has asked, isn't attribution the key to monitoring ROI, though?
Well, attribution is the key to monitoring ROI, but you can't have the absolute attribution. It has to be blended. So let me give you an example from a test that we ran for a customer, I want to say maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. So we were running digital advertising campaigns, and we were running traditional direct mail campaigns at the same time. And the customer was telling us that the traditional direct mail campaigns weren't working well. We just weren't getting any response at all. And I personally have run enough direct mail campaigns. I was confident that the direct mail campaign, while it might not be blowing the doors off, was certainly getting some results. But if you looked in their CRM or if you looked in their marketing attribution system, it would show that there were no customers that were coming from mail. So what I did is I had our team look at everyone that we mailed and then bump that up against the customer list in the CRM. So we would mail, let's just say hypothetically, on November 1st, and on November 30th, I would have them go in and I would say, look at all the customers that came in between November 1st and November 30th and see how many of them we mailed. And I believe for this particular test, I want to say, don't quote me, but the principle is the same. I think we mailed about 5,000 pieces. And at the end of the month, we found that 14 customers that we had mailed had become customers within 30 days during the month that that mail hit. So obviously, it would be somewhat coincidental if 14 out of the 5,000 people that we mailed just randomly became customers at the same time that we were mailing. So I had our team go back and look at the attribution. And when they came back, the attribution was really split between 3 lead sources. It was split between pay-per-click, or that I saw an online ad. It was split between website, where they said, yeah, I went to your website. And then it was split between, I found you doing search. So they were thinking it was SEO. So those 14 customers had given 3 specific responses to how they found the business, but you would be hard-pressed to convince me that my mail piece that I sent out on November 1st isn't what drove them to the internet, whether it be to the website or whether it be to search or whether it be another way that drove them into that online customer acquisition category. So yes, attribution is the key, but in today's consumer journey, the attribution isn't as absolute as it used to be because the customers are interacting with your brand a little more on average than 5 times before they make a buying purchase, and most of those are buying decisions, and most of those interactions happen anonymously, that you don't even know they're happening until all of a sudden they just show up at your door or submit an email address. So yes, attribution is critically important. We just have to understand that the days of absolute attribution are beyond us now because consumers no longer operate in a single channel world. They operate in a multi-channel, multi-touch, multi-device world. Any others, Lisa?
No, carry on, Mark.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into mistake number 5, which I've already alluded to and is very much related to mistake number 4. And that is that business owners focus on the wrong metrics. And I talked a little bit about this in the previous mistake, that it's very easy for us to obsess over things like cost per click and things like cost per lead and things like impression share. And I'm not saying that those metrics don't matter, but I'm saying that as a business owner, as someone who's responsible for generating profit for a business, generating revenue for a business, it's important to make sure we understand that those metrics very rarely tell the full story. And let me give you an example here of what that looks like. So what you see on the screen is some real data from a customer of ours that looks at the comparison between 3 marketing tactics: advertising on Google, advertising on Bing, and advertising on Facebook. And across the top, what you'll see is that we have 4 of the more common metrics that we've talked about: cost per impression, cost per click, cost per lead, and return on investment. So let's go from left to right. If we were looking at cost per impression, we would see here that if we said which one of these is doing the best job of getting us cost per impression, it'd be very obvious: Facebook. Facebook is 13 times more effective than Google, 14 times more effective than Bing when it comes to cost per impression. Let's go a little bit further down the sales funnel and move to the right: cost per click. If we look at cost per click and we say, where are my marketing dollars best spent? Once again, Facebook wins out. Facebook is 46 cents per click, Google is $1.53 per click, and Bing is $2.08 per click. And keep in mind, this is real data from a customer that we work with, and this is illustrative of what we see with the vast majority of our customers. Now, granted, the margin between Google and Facebook, let's say, has shrunk from 13 to 1 at cost per impression to about 3 to 1 at cost per click. Let's go a little bit further to the right, and let's look at cost per lead, the metric that most businesses that are lead generated, lead driven, especially in the home services industry, like to focus on. And so if we go all the way to cost per lead, we see that Facebook is still winning. A cost per lead on Facebook was $10.43, $11.02 on Google, and $16.26 on Bing. So again, the margin, the difference between those are shrinking, but still, if we take that absolute approach, what we're saying is that Facebook is still the best place to invest our marketing dollars, whether we're looking at cost per impression, cost per click, or cost per lead. It's when we get to that ROI metric, the metric that I was talking about earlier, the cost to acquire a customer and the lifetime value of that customer, that we see the whole dynamic changes. And it's not a subtle change in any way. All of a sudden, Google rises to the top at a 411% ROI, and Facebook goes plummeting down to the bottom, even below Bing, at a $2 or 223% ROI. So when we talk about this absolute attribution and we talk about the metrics that we're focused on, it's very easy to look at metrics that are indicative of how our marketing is working. But at the end of the day, we need to have a handful of metrics that are much more reflective of the impact that the marketing is having on our business. When you look at these kind of metrics, you actually have less insight into your marketing, but more insight into how your marketing is driving revenue for your business. And at the end of the day, if our focus is to grow revenue, if our focus is to increase profitability, I have to roll all of my marketing activity up into a metric that drives those, not necessarily leading metrics like cost per lead, cost per click, and cost per impression. So we hear oftentimes, I'm going to talk about this again here in just a bit, that the entire focus of a marketing department is to drive down the cost per lead. But if we're only focused on driving down the cost per lead, you'll see that we may make mistakes in where we choose to spend our marketing dollars, because the best cost per lead in this case actually is the worst ROI. Same thing on cost per click. We have a lot of our clients who say, well, my cost per click seems too high. Your cost per click at the end of the day is irrelevant. Your ROI is what matters. If I would double my Google cost per click and make it $3, I would still have roughly the same ROI, if not marginally better ROI than Facebook does. And so it's important to make sure that we focus on the metrics we can use to improve our marketing, but at the end of the day, we judge our effectiveness on the metrics that really matter, because some of those leading metrics like impressions and clicks and leads can be very misleading if we don't have a picture on how they're actually generating dollars. Lisa, any questions on mistake number 5?
We do. So it sounds like balance is the key. This is coming in from Sarah. It sounds like balance is the key, and understanding that we can't have absolute attribution. Would you recommend having a core budget for channels we know we need to be in? For example, AdWords, email, Facebook, and setting a baseline on how those play together for determining ROI, and then layering on other channels that are experimental like Instagram or YouTube, and see which additional channels will give us the most ROI with our core marketing.
Absolutely, and I think this goes back in a lot of ways to the pyramid approach that I take when I build budgets, and that's a really good observation, Sarah. In my personal view, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I like to have about 60 to 70% of my budget focused on those core tactics, I think was the word you used, like Google AdWords and SEO and directory listings and things like that. I want to make sure that those are there. Then I have a middle bucket that has about 20 to 30% of my marketing spend, which are those tactics that I have reason to believe are going to work, but I haven't been able to validate it yet. And so when you say things like Instagram and Pinterest and stuff like that, I would put those in that category. So in my mind, I would say, for example, well, if Google ads work, then YouTube ads probably ought to work. I know Google ads work because I have the data, so I would put those in the 60 to 70% spend bucket. I think YouTube ads would work, and I've got reason to believe it, or I think Instagram ads would work, and I've got good reason to believe it. So I'd put them in that 20 to 30% bucket that says it's probable that they're going to work, but I don't want to bank on it. And then I've got that remaining budget, which is typically 5 to 10%, that is really my speculative, where I want to say, you know what, this is a really crazy idea, but I want to go try this channel. So maybe what you would say is I want to try something that has to do with virtual reality. And I'm going to take 10% of my budget and I'm going to play around with how can I use this new trend in virtual reality to drive more leads? Or I want to try some special, new social channel that nobody's heard about and try to own it from the very, very beginning. So I think you're thinking of it exactly right, Sarah, is that you want to build your budget tactically or by channel, which is what a lot of people do, but you also want to overlay it and make sure that your attribution model, meaning those 3 categories, are proper and they look like a pyramid. You don't want to spend 50% of your revenue on speculative things. You don't want to spend 70% of your revenue on probable things. You want to build that pyramid that has 60 to 70 predictable on the bottom, 20 to 30 probable in the middle, and 5 to 10% of speculative on the top. And that's how you build an effective marketing plan that avoids a lot of these mistakes that we're talking about today. Any others, Lisa?
No, carry on, Mark.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into number 6. And number 6 is that they focus on the right or the wrong outcome. And again, this goes back somewhat to the data discussion that we've talked about already. But very, very often, the tactics that people choose to use don't match the outcome that they are hoping to achieve. And so it's very, very important when you think about these, that you're saying, okay, what is the outcome that I am truly after? And the easiest way to be able to look at that is that you need to ask yourself, am I using marketing economics or am I using business economics? Because the economics are very, very different. So in a marketing world, we ask the question, how much does it cost? How much does it cost for me to get a click? How much does it cost for me to get a lead? How much does it cost for me to get an impression? That's marketing economics. Business economics are completely different. Business economics are about how much can I pay and still have it make sense for my business. And I know that we probably have a diverse group on the phone that represents business owners, as well as people who are responsible for marketing or managing marketing and reporting to business owners who may not be on the phone. And this becomes a big challenge because many of you who are marketing leaders who report to someone up the organizational chart, you feel like you're being browbeaten day in and day out about lead cost. Why am I paying $80 per lead? What can we do to get the lead cost down to $65 per lead? And I believe very strongly, and I would support you in running this up the flagpole at your organization, that's the wrong metric if we're focused on business. If the exercise is entirely to generate as many leads as we can as cheaply as possible, then maybe that's the right question. But as far as I know, there's no business out there where that's their objective. The objective is to make as much money as possible, to grow as big as possible, and that's a totally different question. So in the world of marketing economics, we say how much does it cost to get a lead? But in the world of business economics, we should be asking ourselves, how much can I pay? Let me give you an example. If I do all of the math on your business, so I look at a cost per lead, the conversion rate on the lead, the average cost or the average sale for a customer, and what your margins are, and I do all of that math, and I come to a calculation that you can spend $125 per lead, and that's how much you can pay. So I looked at how many leads do I convert, how valuable are those leads when they convert, and what's my margin on the business of those from those leads when they convert. And if I do all of the math, I can hit my target profit margins, again, business economics, and still pay $125 per lead. That is a business question. If you as a marketer then are delivering leads at $75 per lead, so from a business perspective, I can afford to pay $125. You as a marketer are delivering leads at $75. I would argue that you're doing a bad job. You should be doing everything you can to drive your lead cost up to $125 a lead, because what it means is you're only getting the low-hanging fruit. You're only getting the inexpensive leads, and you have not been able to go in and get some other leads that are out there in the more expensive channels. And so again, we get back to this concept of you have to look at your marketing as a blend. A pay-per-click lead may cost you $75, but a radio advertising lead or a mail lead or a newspaper advertising lead might cost you $300. But if I blend those two together and they equal $125, that's a business case for how much I can pay for a lead. The best businesses that I've ever worked with are the businesses where the folks who are focused on the business economics will say, I don't care how big my marketing budget is. I will write you as big of a check as you need if you can bring me leads at $125 per lead or $150 per lead. And so it's important as you think through your marketing plan not to artificially limit your ability because you're focused on driving down lead costs. I would argue that most small businesses, most local businesses out there should be focused on driving up their cost per lead, because what it does is it opens up more opportunities to generate more and very often more profitable leads. So the key is when we think about this particular mistake, instead of saying I'm focused on the wrong outcome, which is driving down the cost of lead and asking the question, how much does it cost to get a lead? We need to focus on the business economics, which is the outcome of how much can I pay, and then turn the marketing department loose to go out and generate as many leads as they can that make economic sense. It shouldn't be a matter of your cost per lead budget. It should be a matter of how much profit do you generate and how quickly can you generate it as a business. Lisa, any questions on number 6?
No, Mark, keep going.
All right, well, we're in the home stretch. Not only is it 8 minutes till the top of the hour, but there's only 7 mistakes that we're going to cover. And the last one is a fairly obvious one, but I will tell you one that as much as I shake my head, it seems to come in front of me on an ongoing basis. And so I felt it was important to include it in this particular presentation. And that mistake is that they mismatch objectives and tactics, meaning when they choose a tactic, they plan on that tactic achieving an objective that that tactic isn't built to achieve. So let me give you an example of how I break it down. There's really 3 general objectives in marketing. You have building brand awareness, you have lead generation, and you have relationship building. There are some tactics that work exceptionally well for 1 or 2 of these, and there are other tactics that work well just on one, but there are no tactics that I'm aware of that do all 3 of these things. So for example, we have a lot of clients who got caught up in the hype around Facebook advertising. And don't interpret that to mean that Facebook advertising is bad. Facebook advertising is very good when used well. But those clients were lead-driven businesses, meaning their success when it came to measuring marketing was all about maximizing the number of leads that they could generate. But they would come to us and say, I want to do Facebook advertising. Well, Facebook advertising is a brand awareness medium. It's not a lead generation medium. And so while their business goal was to generate leads, they were using a brand awareness tactic, which was Facebook advertising. And then, of course, inevitably, they're going to be disappointed in the results. So if they had come and said, I want to increase brand awareness among a target market, they wouldn't be focused on achieving the objective of generating leads. It would be focused on brand awareness. And so it's very, very important as you think through your tactics, especially those of you that have to report up the organizational chart, to make sure that your organizational goals of brand awareness, lead generation, and relationship building, that those goals are reflective of the tactics that you're choosing to use. An easy way to think about it is that when you're building brand awareness, your tactics go out and find potential customers. I just mentioned Facebook advertising. So no one goes on Facebook looking for someone to help replace their roof or to put in new windows or to put in new flooring. Nobody goes to Facebook looking for a vendor to do that. Now, they may go to Facebook looking for reviews. They may go to Facebook to ask their friends to make recommendations, but nobody specifically goes on Facebook to find vendors to perform those jobs. But when you run Facebook advertising, you're sticking your ad in front of them. So you have found them, they haven't necessarily found you. And so when you think about brand awareness, you are finding them. You're putting your brand in front of them. They're not necessarily looking for you. Now, lead generation is a little bit different because lead generation tactics, they quote unquote find you. So for example, the cleanest way to describe this would be search engine marketing or pay-per-click. That when someone goes and they search for hardwood floors, they're looking for someone, more than likely, who can install hardwood floors. So they are looking for you, and your pay-per-click ad or your organic search listing, they're going to find you because they're looking for the service you offer. So tactics like SEO, tactics like directory listings, tactics like pay-per-click, and very, very targeted display advertising, they are trying to find your service. In other words, they're looking for you, whereas with brand awareness, you're just trying to get in front of them. And then last but not least is relationship building. And this is where your focus is they know you. So they know you either because you have follow-up drip campaigns built around customer retention, or perhaps they know you because you send them personal notes or because you go and knock on their door and shake their hand and visit them. That local marketing that I forget the name was talking about earlier. All 3 of these are legitimate goals of marketing, but there are some tactics who do one, some tactics that can achieve two, but there are no marketing tactics that can achieve all three. So the mistake that a lot of small business owners make, especially those that market locally, is they have unrealistic expectations because they've mismatched their business objective or their marketing objective with the tactics that they have chosen. So it's important to make sure that if you're in the lead generation business, you spend heavily on lead generation tactics, even though it might be sexy or appealing to try other tactics. If they're brand awareness, they're probably not going to be effective at ultimately achieving your goal. So Lisa, that is my 7th mistake. Are there any last questions before I be quiet and turn the webinar over to you and let people hear how they can actually get a Google Chromecast that they can give as a last-minute gift or keep for themselves and tell no one?
Yeah, jump on to the next slide there. I'll talk about that, and then I do have a pending question for you. As Mark just mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier, we're offering a complimentary digital consultation for all attendees today and a free Google Chromecast for all who qualify for that. This is a one-on-one session, allows you to take full advantage of the insights Mark is sharing today and to find out how you can start 2017 with a clear vision on how to improve your digital marketing. So please take a moment here to submit your answer while Mark answers some remaining questions that we have here. So, Mark, Jill, again, would like to know, is it a mistake to include branding materials like uniform signage or van wraps in the marketing budget when we're talking about branding here?
I don't think so at all. And again, I think it's important when you look at that to say, what are you trying to achieve? And you're really trying to achieve brand awareness. So there's a big element of that, of course, that's customer experience. And this is especially important in the home services industry, because in the home services industry, they're inviting you into their home. And so it's nice for people to have a professional, consistent appearance. But even beyond that, if you have vehicle wraps, if you have uniforms, everywhere your vehicles and everywhere your team goes, people are beginning to see your brand. So absolutely, it's something that should be included in a marketing budget, but make sure that there's a full realization of everyone involved, especially those that might be up the organizational chart, that this is a brand building activity. And we have to agree we're going to invest in this, but we don't have any expectation that it's going to generate leads or have a measurable impact on sales. This is simply a belief that, number one, we want to deliver a consistent and quality customer experience, but number two, we're building brand awareness in the community so that our lead generation activities are more effective, because when people are looking for us, they have a familiarity with the name. They've seen our trucks, they've seen our signs, they've seen our installers, or they've seen our estimators out on the road or at dinner somewhere, and they've seen our logo. So absolutely it should be included. Just make sure that there's a full understanding of what the purpose of it is, and it's not to generate leads.
Excellent, thank you. And one final question here. Dan says, thank you for your insights and thoughts today. If you were to give us one takeaway or tell us what you felt was the most important mistake we should avoid, what would that be?
You know what, I'm going to lump them all, Dan, into, and you're a lot like me, Dan. I'm like, yeah, that's an hour. Give me the one thing I can take away. So I love it. For me, if I lumped all of these into a single mistake, and it's not one of them that I put a spotlight on here, but I think very broadly, the biggest mistake that marketers make, both on the local level and on the national level, is they ignore the fact that ultimately what we're focused on doing as marketers is we are focused on taking customers on that journey from wherever they are today to the point where they're exchanging their dollars for our goods and services. And the mistake is to ignore how the customers want to go on that journey. If we force customers to take that journey our way, they'll come kicking and screaming, and marketing is very, very hard. If we support the customer's desire to take the journey their way, which is multi-channel, multi-touch, multi-device over an extended period of time, they appreciate the fact that we've made it very, very easy for them to take that journey when they make their final decision. So big picture, Dan, I would say the biggest mistake that marketers make, both at the local level and at the national level, is they ignore the fact that in today's world, the consumer journey should trump everything else. And if we're not focusing our attention on how consumers take that journey, which if you think about it is a common element in all of these mistakes. If we're not focused on how consumers take this journey, we're not focused on delivering good and effective marketing. And I believe that that trend is only going to become more significant in the future as technology and information put consumers more and more in control of when and how they receive their marketing messages.
All right. So huge thanks to Mark for your time today and to all of our attendees. Please do join us for more upcoming webinars in the new year. On January 10th, we'll be kicking off with actionable tips from Brian Rutowski, an expert on local listings data and a VP at Yext. There's a link to that at the top of our homepage on surefiresocial.com. And if you were napping during our poll, I'll mention it one last time, we're offering a Google Chromecast for all who are qualified for a complimentary digital consultation with us. If you missed out on that, just shoot us an email to marketing@surefiresocial.com. Thanks again and have a great holiday.